There is a subtle tension that follows you through ordinary days. Not loud enough to alarm you, yet constant enough to drain you. The tension of being observed, evaluated, measured. You speak, and a part of your mind immediately asks, "How did that sound?" You act, and another voice wonders, "How will this be perceived?" Even in silence there is rehearsal. Even in rest there is anticipation. It rarely feels like fear. It feels like responsibility, politeness, awareness. But look closer. Why does your mood shift so easily with someone's approval or disapproval? Why does a neutral comment echo longer than it deserves? Why does disagreement sometimes feel like danger rather than difference? This is not social sensitivity, it is psychological dependence. Seeking approval appears harmless because it hides behind virtues: kindness, humility, adaptability. Yet Stoic philosophy draws a sharper distinction. Epictetus explains in the Enchiridion that some things are within your control, while others are not. Among those not within your control stand reputation, opinions, and judgments formed in other minds. To anchor your inner stability to them is to build peace on moving ground. This reflection is not about rebellion against society, not about becoming cold, distant, or indifferent. Stoicism never demanded emotional numbness. It demanded clarity. The clarity to recognize when your peace is being negotiated with forces you cannot command. Something begins to change when this is seen honestly. When you notice that anxiety is often not born from events, but from the silent need to be validated by them. When you realize how much mental energy is consumed, not by living, but by managing how you are perceived while living. The shift is internal, precise, demanding. It is the movement from external permission to internal authority, from emotional reaction to rational examination, from dependence on approval to stability grounded in self-governance. Because the moment approval stops being a necessity, something unexpected happens. You do not lose connection with the world. You lose the invisible tension that made every interaction feel like a test. Approval as emotional currency approval is rarely seen for what it truly becomes. It is treated as something pleasant, a welcome affirmation, a sign of harmony. Yet over time, it quietly transforms into currency. Something you seek, collect, depend upon, a psychological payment system where acceptance feels like profit and disapproval feels like loss. Notice how subtly the exchange begins. You adjust a sentence to sound more agreeable. You soften an opinion to avoid friction. You hide a preference to maintain approval. Each compromise appears insignificant. Together, they shape a habit, trading authenticity for acceptance. The danger is not social adaptation, it is emotional valuation. When approval becomes the measure of your internal state, your stability is outsourced. A compliment elevates you. Silence unsettles you. Criticism disturbs you. Your emotional climate is no longer self-regulated, it is market-driven. Seneca warns in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 9, that the wise person seeks self-sufficiency, not isolation, but independence from psychological slavery. If your peace rises and falls with external validation, you are not relating to people freely. You are negotiating with them for emotional security. Here lies the hidden fragility. If approval is your currency, rejection becomes poverty. A single disapproving glance can feel like deprivation. A disagreement can feel like threat. Not because harm occurred, but because your mind interprets it as loss of value. Marcus Aurelius reflects in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 6, that your worth is not determined by the voices around you, but by the character you cultivate within. Yet, when approval governs perception, self-worth becomes unstable, fluctuating with opinions you neither own nor control. Freedom begins with a difficult recognition. Approval is pleasant, but it is not nourishment. When mistaken for necessity, it breeds dependency. When seen clearly, it loses the power to dictate your emotional equilibrium, and once that dependency weakens, a deeper question emerges. If approval is no longer the measure of your worth, what remains as the foundation of your stability? The exhaustion of self-editing. There is a fatigue, that does not come from work, conflict, or effort. It comes from constant self-monitoring. The silent habit of watching yourself while you speak, while you act, while you exist among others. Not living spontaneously, but performing carefully. Thoughts are filtered before they are expressed. Reactions are adjusted before they are visible. Words are rehearsed before they are spoken. A continuous internal negotiation unfolds. Will this be accepted? Will this sound right? Will this disturb someone's perception of me? This vigilance feels like awareness, yet its cost is severe. Mental bandwidth is consumed not by reality, but by managing impressions. Attention fractures. Presence weakens. Instead of engaging fully with the moment, a portion of your mind remains occupied with how the moment is being evaluated. Epictetus teaches in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, that if you wish to improve, be content to appear foolish or strange in matters that are not essential. But the approval-driven mind cannot tolerate this freedom. It treats perception as survival. Every interaction becomes a test. Every expression becomes a risk calculation. The consequence is not only anxiety, but identity erosion. When behavior is constantly adjusted for acceptance, authenticity becomes unstable. You begin to lose clarity about what you genuinely think, prefer, value. The self becomes shaped by anticipation rather than conviction. Marcus Aurelius writes in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 5, that the mind becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. A mind trained in self-editing adopts tension as its default tone. Relaxation feels unsafe. Naturalness feels exposed. Silence feels loaded with interpretation. And beneath this exhaustion lies a deeper discomfort. No matter how carefully you edit yourself, approval remains uncertain, which leads to an unsettling realization. If constant adjustment does not secure peace, why does the mind continue believing it will? Why approval never feels like enough? Approval promises relief, a sense of being validated, accepted, confirmed. For a moment, tension softens, doubt quiets, the mind feels reassured. Yet the effect is strangely fragile, short-lived, incomplete. Soon, the need returns. This is not coincidence, it is adaptation. What once satisfied quickly becomes baseline. A compliment that once felt powerful becomes expected. Acceptance that once brought comfort becomes normal. The nervous system adjusts, and the psychological hunger subtly increases. More reassurance, more recognition, more signals of validation are required to produce the same emotional effect. Seneca observes in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 16, that no amount of external security can calm a mind that has not learned stability within. When approval is treated as emotional fuel, the mind becomes dependent on continuous supply. Absence feels like deprivation. Neutrality feels like rejection. Notice the trap. The pursuit intensifies the deficiency it attempts to resolve. The more approval is needed, the more vulnerable peace becomes. Because what depends on others' responses inherits their unpredictability. You are emotionally tied to variables you cannot regulate. Epictetus explains in the Enchiridion that if you desire what is not within your control, disturbance follows inevitably. Approval belongs precisely to that category. It cannot be commanded, only received. To build emotional security upon it is to construct stability on uncertainty itself. The deeper paradox emerges slowly. The mind that needs approval cannot be satisfied by it. Each validation soothes briefly, then reinforces the belief that validation is necessary. The cycle sustains itself. And beneath this endless search hides an uncomfortable truth. One most people avoid examining. Is the fear truly rejection by others, or is it something far more intimate? Most people are not rejected by others. Most people are not rejected by the world as often as they believe. They are rejected first by their own interpretation. A look becomes judgment. Silence becomes disapproval. A neutral response becomes imagined criticism. The external event is ambiguous. The internal verdict is severe. Before others withdraw acceptance, the mind frequently withdraws self-acceptance. It anticipates criticism, assumes inadequacy, predicts negative evaluation. Then it seeks approval, not as a preference, but as compensation, a way to silence the doubt it created. Marcus Aurelius reflects in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, that the mind colors events according to its judgments. When self-perception is unstable, the world begins to appear hostile, dismissive, unforgiving. Not because reality changed, but because expectation distorted perception. Observe how subtly this unfolds. You enter a room already measuring yourself. You speak already braced for evaluation. You act already negotiating acceptance. The fear is not born in the environment, it is carried into it. Epictetus teaches in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, that if someone speaks ill of you, remember that they speak from what seems right to them. Yet the approval-dependent mind rarely waits for real judgment. It manufactures imagined rejection, then reacts emotionally to its own creation. Here lies the quiet tragedy. The mind becomes both accuser and defendant. It generates insecurity, then demands reassurance. It predicts disapproval, then fears its arrival. The exhaustion deepens, not because rejection is constant, but because internal tension is. And when this pattern is seen clearly, a decisive shift becomes possible. Not in how others see you, but in who governs how you see yourself. The Stoic break, reclaiming inner authority. There is a decisive turning point in Stoic practice, a break not from the world, but from confusion. The confusion of believing that your peace depends on managing perceptions, securing approval, preventing judgment. Stoicism cuts through this illusion with uncomfortable precision. Epictetus states in the Enchiridion that some things are within your control, while others are not. Within your control stand judgment, intention, choice, response. Outside your control stand reputation, praise, criticism, and the shifting opinions of others. The distinction is simple. Living it is demanding. When approval governs your emotional state, authority is misplaced. Your inner stability becomes conditional, vulnerable to interpretations formed in minds you neither inhabit nor command. You attempt to regulate the uncontrollable, then suffer the instability that inevitably follows. Marcus Aurelius writes in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 12, that if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this estimate you have the power to revoke. This is not poetic comfort. It is a call to responsibility. Reclaiming inner authority means repositioning the source of your stability. From external permission to internal governance, from reaction to examination, from emotional reflex to rational evaluation, you no longer ask, how are they judging me? You ask, how am I judging this? The shift is subtle, yet transformative. Opinions lose their power to define you. Praise becomes pleasant, but unnecessary. Criticism becomes information rather than injury. Your equilibrium is no longer negotiated with the world, and once this authority returns, another freedom emerges naturally. If others' judgments are no longer your burden to control, what remains is acceptance. Acceptance not of weakness, but of reality itself. Acceptance. Let them think what they think. Much of the tension surrounding approval comes from an invisible struggle. The attempt to manage how you exist inside other people's minds. To correct impressions, soften judgments, prevent misunderstanding. A silent negotiation that never truly ends. Stoic clarity dissolves this struggle at its root. Other people's thoughts do not belong to your domain of control. Epictetus reminds us, in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, that if you concern yourself with what is not yours to govern, disturbance becomes inevitable. Opinions formed by others are precisely that territory. Acceptance here is not passive resignation. It is psychological release. The recognition that you are not responsible for regulating perceptions you cannot command. That disagreement is not failure. That misunderstanding is not catastrophe. That approval withheld is not value removed. Marcus Aurelius reflects in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 6, that you may leave others to their own judgments, just as you would not demand authority over their thoughts. When this boundary becomes real, a profound lightness emerges. The mind stops holding imaginary trials. The need to defend identity against every interpretation begins to weaken. Consider the alternative most people live: a constant internal courtroom, replaying conversations, justifying actions, anticipating criticism. Peace becomes conditional upon verdicts that never arrive conclusively. Acceptance ends the trial by withdrawing from jurisdiction that was never yours. Let them think what they think. Let them interpret as they will. Their judgments are expressions of their perspective, not definitions of your reality. Stability returns when you stop treating external evaluation as internal truth. And as this freedom deepens, an unexpected question surfaces. Who are you when no audience is present? Identity without audience. Remove the observers for a moment. No approval to gain, no judgment to avoid, no image to maintain. Who remains? Not the version shaped by expectation, but the one that exists when performance is unnecessary. Most identities are constructed socially, adjusted, refined, edited in response to feedback, acceptance, rejection. Gradually, the line between character and presentation blurs. You begin to act not from conviction, but from anticipation, not from clarity, but from perceived reception. Stoic philosophy invites a more demanding foundation. Marcus Aurelius writes in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 3, that the true worth of a person is measured by the quality of their inner life, not by external recognition. Character is formed in the private domain long before it is displayed publicly. Identity without audience reveals an uncomfortable truth. Many behaviors are sustained not because they align with values, but because they secure approval. Many silences are chosen not from wisdom, but from fear. Many expressions are shaped less by honesty than by acceptance-seeking. To confront this is not to reject society, it is to recover integrity, the alignment between what you think, what you value, and how you act when no external validation is at stake. A self that remains coherent in solitude is a self less vulnerable in public. Epictetus teaches in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, that if you wish to improve, concern yourself with being good rather than appearing good. Without this distinction, identity becomes fragile, dependent on constant reinforcement. With it, stability strengthens quietly. When you are no longer performing for an audience, choices begin to feel clearer, reactions less calculated, presence less divided, peace less negotiated. And then the title's promise begins to unfold in concrete terms. What actually starts to change? What actually begins to change? When the need for approval loosens, change does not announce itself dramatically. It appears quietly, almost unnoticed at first. Situations that once produced tension begin to feel lighter. Interactions that once triggered over-analysis lose their intensity. The world remains the same. Your internal experience of it shifts. Anxiety begins to weaken, not because uncertainty disappears, but because your stability is no longer anchored to unpredictable reactions. The mind stops rehearsing every possible judgment. Mental noise decreases. Attention returns to what is present rather than what might be thought. Emotional spikes become less frequent. Criticism still arrives, but it no longer penetrates with the same force. Praise still pleases, yet it no longer defines worth. The nervous system exits a constant state of social vigilance. A subtle calm replaces the pressure of being psychologically evaluated. Decisions become clearer. Without the distortion of approval-seeking, choices are guided more by judgment than by fear of perception. You act with greater coherence, less hesitation, less internal negotiation. Energy once spent managing impressions becomes available for living deliberately. Marcus Aurelius reflects in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, that the tranquility of the mind depends on how it interprets events. As interpretation stabilizes, emotional turbulence loses momentum. Not suppressed, but proportioned. Overthinking begins to lose its grip. The endless replay of conversations, the anticipation of disapproval, the analysis of imagined reactions gradually diminish. Not because the mind stops thinking, but because it stops treating every perception as threat. What changes first is subtle. then structural. Perception alters emotional response. Emotional response alters behavior. Behavior alters experience. And beneath these shifts emerges a deeper realization. Nothing external was holding your peace hostage. Seen from the outside, nothing fundamental may appear different. The same people, the same routines, the same uncertainties. Yet internally, a reordering has taken place. Approval is no longer the axis around which perception revolves. Control has been returned to its proper domain. The struggle that once dominated the mind begins to dissolve. The struggle to secure validation, to prevent judgment, to stabilize identity through external reactions. Stoic insight reveals that this conflict was never imposed by the world, but generated through interpretation. Epictetus teaches in the Enchiridion that disturbance arises when we attach ourselves to what is not within our control. Approval, reputation, opinion. These belong to other minds, shaped by perspectives we cannot govern. When your peace depends upon them, instability becomes inevitable. But when perception shifts, freedom follows. You cease negotiating emotional security with variables that cannot be commanded. You allow others their judgments without internalizing them as verdicts. You recognize that the true source of agitation was never events themselves, but the meaning assigned to them. Marcus Aurelius reflects in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 6, that if you are distressed by anything external, the cause lies in your estimate of it. And this estimate remains within your authority, not because reality bends to thought, but because experience bends to interpretation. Peace emerges not as withdrawal from life, but as independence within it. Cognitive autonomy, acceptance of others' autonomy, reason guiding judgment rather than emotion dictating reaction. Stability no longer borrowed from approval, but generated through clarity. Nothing external was controlling you. Your interpretation of it was. Peace does not arrive when the world becomes agreeable. It arrives when your mind stops demanding that agreement as a condition for stability. The search for approval loses its urgency when you no longer confuse recognition with worth, acceptance with identity, opinion with truth. Stoic wisdom does not harden you against life. It steadies you within it. Marcus Aurelius writes in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 12, that the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Not because thoughts alter fate, but because they determine how fate is encountered. When approval ceases to govern your inner climate, a quiet strength replaces the former tension. You move through interactions without the constant burden of self-monitoring. You face disagreement without feeling diminished. You experience criticism without collapsing into self-doubt. Praise becomes welcome, yet unnecessary for equilibrium. Nothing essential is lost. Connection remains possible. Respect remains valuable. Relationships remain meaningful. What disappears is the invisible pressure of psychological dependence, the exhausting need to secure emotional safety through external validation. Approval is pleasant, but no longer necessary. What remains is clarity. A mind less reactive, less anxious, less divided. A self grounded not in perception, but in character. Not in approval granted, but in integrity maintained. Carry this understanding as practice, not memory. The world will continue to present judgments, preferences, disagreements. Let it. Your task is not to control how others see you, but to govern how you see what cannot be controlled. Strength becomes quieter, freedom becomes internal, peace becomes durable. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, please like, share and subscribe for more Stoic insights and watch the latest videos.